Pocahontas, Chapter 2, Part 6. And we're going to finish up with Chapter 2 in this very short segment, starting on page 45. John Smith was tired. He was tired, not only tired in his body, but tired of people, of their mutinies, their complaints, their difficulties among themselves, their everlasting unreasonableness. Indeed, it was easier to deal with the Indians than with his own people. On his return trip, he lay down on the bottom of his boat to take a nap. As usual, the bag in which he kept his gunpowder hung from his waist, lying on his hip. Suddenly a spark, perhaps from someone's pipe, lighted on the bag, and it burst into flames. John jumped into the water, but the fire had already burned the flesh off a 10 square inch of his body. He was so severely burned he had to be saved from drowning, and at Jamestown he had to be carried ashore. As painful as his wound was, however, John Smith was conscious and wanted the news. No, the flagship had not arrived, he was told. Everyone had decided that it must have sunk, so the settlers had formed a government of their own. Archer and Ratcliffe, of course, had prominent places in the government. John Smith had none. Well, what could he do? John asked himself. How could he fight these old enemies again? Stripped of his authority, what good was he? What good was he anyway, with a wound which kept him on his back and which would take weeks to heal? Then Ratcliffe hired a man to shoot John in his sleep. The man lost his nerve at the last minute, but John didn't care to test his luck further. He asked to be carried on board one of the returning ships. He was not going to quit the New World. After 3 years in Virginia, he loved the New World too much to quit it, but he was going to take a rest from it. A few days later, he was bound for London. Of course, the Indians noticed that John Smith was no longer around. Where was he, they asked. He was dead, the settler said. Dead and buried. When Powhatan heard the news, he shook his head. Maybe he was dead, maybe not. The English often lied. But Pocahontas believed. John Smith loved her land too much to leave it. Moreover, he was too brave to have been frightened off by anything or anyone. And so there we have the end of Chapter 2.